flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Susan Locke with an invitation.
We seek your help with our affairs tonight. Bless this meeting with your divine intelligence and help us to make the best use of our own. Happy New Year. Amen.
Amen. Supervisor Robo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move for the adoption of this evening's agenda.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address anything on the agenda for this evening? Now is your chance to talk. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address anything on the agenda this evening? Yes, come up to the microphone. Use that microphone. You have to state your name and address.
Bert Hoppy, 2411 Doty Street in Oshkosh.
Okay.
When it comes to the e-cigarette ban, is there anything to listen first and reply after, or no?
Now's your chance to say what you want to say.
Okay, if we need to supply documents or anything from the vaping community, do we submit that directly to Winnebago Council, or?
No, I would send it to the health department.
Okay.
We'll see, I think the clerk got his address and everything. We'll see that you get his address and where to send the information.
Okay, because we'll be supplying documents in reference.
We'll give you what you're asked for that we have.
Okay. Because we'll be supplying documents and everything to supporting the vaping community, so.
Okay. I guess I'm missing something. You want us to you want us to provide you with the documents.
No, I'm asking if we can supply documents, because we don't know where their documents will be coming from, or if we need to go directly through them, that's fine. I understand that then.
We'll ask the health director that question when he gives his presentation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address the board on anything on the agenda this evening? That portion of the meeting will be closed. Reports from committees, commissions, and boards. Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to reference the December 24th front page article in the Neenah Menasha News Record, which provided an update. This had previously been in the Oshkosh Northwestern. This article provided an update on the Tri-County Ice Arena, giving an account of the improvements made and the challenges to be faced. But most impressive about this article was an account that the ice rental time at the facility is at 100% usage. So they're at capacity for the service that they could provide to the public. And from my perspective, the current outcome appears to be truly a validation of the deliberative process of this board and its leaders in coming to the agreement that we did. And if you would like to see the article, I have a copy with me, or you could reference the December 24th news record of Neenah Menasha News Record. Second item, I would like to report attendance at a January 5th award ceremony for the Sheriff's Department, at which 5 sergeants were promoted to lieutenant to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of operations. 2 new employees were introduced and a K-9 was retired. During Sheriff Motz's presentation, he shared with the assemblage that in the past 4 years, there has been a turnover of 84 employees retired and those who've left the department, and 33 promotions. And according to the 2015 budget statistics, there are 205 positions projected for 2015 in the Sheriff's Department. So you can see 84 out of 205 can see how large a turnover there has been in the last 4 years in that department. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Supervisor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. Today we had a Parkview Center meeting, and Morgan Hinckley said that the state finally came in. They was coming in for about the last 3 months, but they happened to just come in. They were there for about 4 days, and Parkview came out with no violations, so it's a lot of credit to the people that work at Parkview Health Center. It's almost an impossibility to have no violations, say, when the state comes in, because they're there to find these things, you know. So it's just a great job by everybody that works at Parkview Health Center.
Good. Supervisor Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What Supervisor Eisen reported from the newspaper, I did stop at Tri-County Ice Arena, I believe just yesterday, and talked to Troy from the Appleton Hockey Club, and he said that they've had some glitches. One of the old compressors went down. They got it back up and going. They did mill the parking lot. If you go out there, you'll notice that there are still some craterous areas where it needs to be improved, but it is improved in its current state regardless. But he did note that usership is up. They're getting creative on Friday nights, opening up rinks when there are maybe just a few skaters who might offset the cost of electricity for the lights. They're making the players and the skaters out there better, and I think they're making a good run of it, and they're building trust in all the clubs out there. So thank you, Mr. Eisen, for that report.
Thank you. Supervisor Warnke.
As far as that ice arena goes from now on in, I think it should be called what it's named, and that is the Appleton Ice. It's no longer the Tri-County Ice Arena. I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay. Correspondence from the clerk. She has no correspondence. The County Board Chairman. I just wanted to report that Tim Hamlin resigned from the board effective the 31st of December. So he will no longer be with us. We have an ad going in the paper. He said it was due to poor health. We have an ad in the paper coming out tomorrow, or it's going to be put in tomorrow. And so we wish Tim all the luck going on, whatever going on with him. And Supervisor Wagner had asked to be excused for this evening. Supervisor Keel asked to be excused, and Supervisor Egan had asked to be excused. So, Supervisor Ellis.
I forgot one other thing here. A few days ago, a guy that sat at my chair for 14 years, Steve Rankin, passed away, and I think his funeral is Saturday, if anybody would be interested. He was my neighbor also for about 14 years, so.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask Matt Armatowski come up. He's representing the Menasha Blue Jays, and he'll be accepting the commendation for Jeremy Korth. We'll come up with it. The commendation reads, whereas the Menasha High School Blue Jays football team completed its first session as undefeated champions in the Bay Conference with an 8-0 record, outscoring its opponents a combined 37-62, whereas the Blue Jays soundly defeated Menominee 35-14 in its WIAA Division II Level 1 playoff game, edged Hortonville 21-20, in Level 2, Double Dutch Superior, 28-14, in Level 3, and produced a come-from-behind nail-biter versus Homestead in Level 4. Whereas the talented team left no doubt by soundly defeating Waukesha, West 35-17, in the Division's 2 state championship contest, November 21st, 2014, at Camp Randall Stadium in Madison, achieving the program's first such championship in school history. Now therefore be it resolved that the Winnebago County Board of Supervisors support a commendation to reflect the accommodations of the 2014 state champion Menasha Blue Jays football team. Be it further resolved that on behalf of the Winnebago County Board of Supervisors, I extend congratulations to head coach Jeremy Korth, his assistants, and the Menasha Blue Jays football team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Plus, I've been advised that one of our supervisors used to be a Blue Jay. Supervisor Finch was a Blue Jay at one time, so. And I'd like to thank Supervisor Haig for bringing this information forward to us. Thank you.
Very much.
At this time, I'd like to ask Jerry Bougie, the Director of Planning and Zoning, and he's involved with the Industrial Development Board. He'll be giving us an update on what's happening with the Industrial Development Board.
Good evening, everyone. On your desks, you'll see this light brown colored report. You'll find that and drag that out. I'll just kind of give an update on the Industrial Development Board for the county. Primarily, we're doing a lot of exciting things, long history with the board, and just like to give you an update on where things are at, some history, and some of the good things, good positive things that are going on here. First of all, my role is primarily as a staff person for the Industrial Development Board. I basically provide the kind of the key contact for the county in regard to economic development matters and for the Industrial Development Board. So that's my primary role with the board. Board was originally incorporated back in 1966. It sat idle for a number of years and until about 1979. This board, the county board, which by the way, you will kind of see it mentioned in a number of different areas here. This county board has been very supportive over the years, I think, in regard to economic development matters for the county. Always on the forefront of financing and assisting local units of government, and I think this board has been a leader over the years. So in 1979, the IDB was formally set up. It was set up by the county board. There was a brand new economic development. That's correct, Mr. Robel. Yes. And that original $1 million fund, as Supervisor Robel indicates, sort of kicked off the county getting involved in economic development. The Industrial Development Board was set up. This county board also allocated to the IDB some dollars for an economic development grant program for local units of government, which became known as a per capita funding program. The IDB set up some bylaws. Essentially, we have an 11-member board. Supervisor Robel is a member, long-time member. How long you been? Not that long. Oh, you've been in. And certainly Supervisor Albrecht has been, he's currently the chairman of the IDB and been very supportive and longtime member. And also Supervisor Keller in the back is currently the vice chair of the board. And unfortunately, Supervisor Hamlin, who's currently on the board, is, we'll have to work on finding another county board supervisor to fill his place eventually. The 11-member board, again, there's 5 persons that are made up of folks by virtue of their position in the county. And as I indicated, the county board chairman, the chair of the Personnel and Finance Committee is automatically on. Our county executive, Mark Harris. Corporation Counsel, Mr. Bodner, and our county treasurer, Mary Krieger. We have, again, the 3 at-large members from the county board, and also we get 3 at-large members from the general public, and those can be really anyone from the business community, from the local units of government, and currently it's George Dearborn from the town of Menasha, Elizabeth Hartman from Chamco, and Linda Kuchenreiter, who's the administrator of the city of Amarillo. So that's how the board is currently made up. The mission of IDB, and it's an important mission, and one of the key things they do is they financially assist local units of government, communities, and economic development organizations in the county. Really, to create jobs, expand the tax base, and promote the county as a good place to do business. And that's been a long time mission of the board. And they really carry that out in 3 key ways. They have 2 revolving loan funds that they operate. Also the annual economic development grant program for local units of government, which is again known as our per capita funding program. And we also routinely spend a lot of time networking and partnering with local economic development groups and regional groups and so forth, and at the state level. So those are really 3 primary ways we carry that mission out. Now what I'm going to do is just sort of quickly go through the various programs that the board operates. Again, one of the key programs they do is the revolving loan fund program. It's their traditional loan fund program, initially established by the county board with $1 million. Again, since 2010, there's been an influx, but again, this county board has been a leader in this. They allocated an additional $1 million since 2010 to build the revolving loan fund, simply because we see a lot of projects and there's need out there for businesses to tap into this revolving loan fund. Over the years, we've added up about $685,000 of interest, which has also gone into the revolving loan fund. And currently, the fund has a little over $2.6 million in which to work with. We currently have a little over $1.2 million loaned out. Since 1980, with all the loans we've issued, it's been we loaned out about a little over $10 million for various projects throughout the county. So the total number of loans we've issued we've issued 31 loans, but the average size of a loan is about $337,000 that the board allocates or awards to projects in the county. Then the other loan program is a community development block grant program. This was really established by the state. They provided funding to several businesses in the county, and the way this was set up was those businesses then paid the county back when they repaid their loan. So that essentially built a fund up that the IDB then could re-loan out for other projects in the county. And there's a lot of kind of specific criteria that's related to this program. It's, and these are loans that are directly given to businesses by the IDB, and they're also, there's a lot of fairly strict criteria that's, we do use the fund, and it's well used, but it's, it doesn't provide us with, at times, the, the flexibility that we're looking for. But it does get used. We did just allocate another loan out to a company by the name of Outlook Group up in the town of Menasha. They just repaid one of their loans, and we reissued them another loan. So it does get used, and it's sort of used for niche purposes, and so with the two programs, it's been very successful, creating jobs, and you'll see that on the next page. On page 3, you'll see the economic impacts from the loans. Predominantly, what you'll see on this page is really the loans that have been issued through the county's traditional loan fund. Over the years, we've created over 6,600 jobs and over $340 million of income, annual income from workers that have obtained jobs through the various companies that have been funded through the program, and nearly $600 million, about $580 million of equalized value created in the county from these various businesses that have been that benefited from the program. Some of the impacts, each dollar that's loaned out from the fund, it creates about $58 in new equalized value to the tax base. So every dollar that's loaned out creates an additional $58 in valuation to the tax base. So there's your tax base building up, creates about $34 in income for folks, for families. Some of the additional impacts, for every job that's created, we've loaned, well, there's one new job created for every $1,500 that the board has loaned out. The national average tends to be around $5,300 loaned out for every job created. So we're getting a good bang for the buck, and the primary reason for that is some of the loans that the board has issued primarily early on in the program has been the establishment of industrial parks in the county. When the IDB got into this, when the county got into this back in 1980, it was really the beginning development of a lot of the industrial parks throughout the county, and so that fostered a lot of additional businesses in those industrial parks, and a lot of jobs created, a lot of tax base created, a lot of income. When you look at, you talk to economists, they have something called multiplier effects. That when you create jobs, direct jobs, there's also benefit, kind of indirect benefits that are created, and that's called a multiplier effect. And based on the numbers that the types of direct jobs and direct income that's been created through the IDB and their loan fund, it's estimated that about another 2,900 jobs are created throughout the county indirectly. And the same thing with income, with the various direct income that's been created through the loans. An additional $150 million throughout the county was created based on the loans issued. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the interest on the income from the loans to date has totaled about $685,000. That's gone in again back into the fund to be reloaned out again. So there's really a lot of you know, the old economic engine is really the message here that the IDB has been successful in keeping going here and fostering and enhancing throughout the county. Page 4, just the other way that the county, again, that the IDB meets their mission. You know, they have their annual grant program for local units of government, their economic development grant program, the per capita funding program. This has been a long-standing program with the board, again, since their inception back in 1980. You know, they basically it's grants to enhance and support local units of government and their economic development projects. It's been a very successful program. Communities love it. Economic development entities, they really enjoy the fact that there's support at the county level for these kinds of activities. Over the years, again, about $2.5 million has been granted back to the local units of government for these economic development efforts. And again, we're coming up here in 2015, and it won't be long before the IDB grants out some additional dollars through this program for 2015. And we are beginning to ask the local units of government for proposals for 2015 on how they intend to use their funds. You know, the county grants $190,000 a year. It's the funds come from the county board at budget time, allocated to the IDB. The IDB then opens it up to the local units of government to make proposals, and then at that point the IDB reviews those and grants dollars based on the proposals, assuming they're acceptable. Currently it's at a $1 per capita funding level. So basically, if you got a community and you have a community of 50,000 people, you would be eligible for $1 per capita, which is $50,000, for example. So it's allocated on a $1 per capita basis. That net number is higher than it has been in the past. In the past, it's been 50 cents, it's been 80 cents. It's been various amounts under $1, but at the present time, it's grown to $1 at the present. In addition, we do provide some direct grants to some economic development entities that are more regional in base in their focus, more county and regional based, such as East Central ITBEC, which is the International Trade and Business Economic Council, the Oshkosh Oshkosh Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Northeast Wisconsin Regional Economic Partnership. These are sort of organizations that the county is involved in and support. We do provide direct grants to them as well. Again, the local units of government must meet the criteria established by the board. You know, the funds have been used for a variety of things by the local units of government. You know, we are pretty flexible on the use of those funds. Typically, it's for seed money, for economic development programs, for marketing and promotional activities that the local units of governments are involved in, feasibility studies, you know, related to economic development, administrative costs that they would have related to economic development, and so forth. So, you know, it's been a very successful program, and it's been very helpful, you know, with supporting local efforts. You know, in the third, just briefly, the third way that the IDB meets their mission really is through networking and partnering with other economic development groups, entities, committees, both at the local level, the county level, the regional level, state level. We are routinely involved in activities related to economic development. these various groups that are out there. At this point, there's additional information supplied. I provided in the appendix here a variety of different information that basically itemizes all the loans that the board's issued over the years. I won't go into that certainly, and also what the current state of the loans, the status of the loans are. That's all there for you to take a look at at your leisure. At this point, I'll open it up for any questions.
Would you explain like how the communities back the loans?
How the communities?
Like back or guarantee the loan, a community has to...
Thanks. For the IDB's revolving loan fund, the traditional loan fund, the big one, the communities back their loans with their taxing authority. So they secure the loan with their taxing authority. So the applicant is actually the local community for a project in their community. They secure the loan with their taxing authority. That's how the county is protected. And it's been very successful in method of doing these loans.
And this all started by Jim Coughlin,
right,
former executive, when interest rates were at 18+%.
That's correct. Yeah, that was in '79. Mr. Coughlin was spearheaded that with the board.
Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bougie, has there been any effort to snag some of the money that the Wisconsin Economic Development Board has put out at the state level? Is there any infrastructure that enables a local development board to outreach and partner with the state agency? Because that seems to be dominating the news wires for the last several years, not only because of the novelty of the new agency, but also the breadth of the monies that they have been able to present. Any insight as to whether they have a pipeline that may come down to our agency to enable us to have a larger source of dollars to help our local business startups?
Yeah, WEDC administers a program that... I'm sorry? Okay. Yeah, WEDC, they do have a program whereby they will essentially secure the loans, provide security on the loans. If we have a loan program, for instance, and we do, they would offer to secure those loans on behalf of the local municipality. Now, that it's a somewhat complex endeavor to get into. We did investigate that at one point a couple of years ago. At this point, the board has felt that it wasn't necessary to get involved in that, but that still remains out there, and it is still an option. Now, is there any additional, dollars to tap into that would benefit the county? You need it for a specific reason. There's got to be, a need for whatever issue that you're trying to meet here, and so that's kind of a wide open thing that there could potentially be some dollars out there. We spend time paying attention to that, but unless unless there's a strong need to tap into those dollars, because you tap into those dollars, it brings other issues along with it that you have to deal with. So,
looking at the potential for seed money, we don't have to look any much further than the Aviation Industrial Park.
Sure.
This is at a very formative stage of development. It would seem to me it might be beneficial for our Industrial Development Board to take a second look and to see in what ways we could leverage the partnership with the State Economic Development Board, because that's what they're trying to do, and we've got a local handle on it, and perhaps we can get something moving while interest rates are still very, very low.
Yeah, certainly, I think the board is always open to, to looking at those options, and the suggestion relative to the aviation park is a good one, So I think, that's a discussion the board has to have, and to see if there's some options out there for us, certainly.
The state, with the state, we originally started out with $200,000 that we loaned to, I think it was 200 to a dairy.
Right.
Out by the county line. We got that money back, and we could keep using that money to loan out, which we did. But now the state has made the restrictions so hard to follow that it's next to impossible to loan it out.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Supervisor Furry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at next to the last page on the bottom. Maybe you can explain that sentence there. With the asterisk, it says loans are in collaboration with solid waste management bond funding.
Board funding, yeah.
Impression would be that they have quite a reserve out there, and we're using that.
Yeah, I can. I'll
elaborate on that if you
would.
Yeah,
absolutely. There was a point that, about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, that the IDB itself, their loan fund, all the money was loaned out essentially. And at that point, it was only a little over $1 million, maybe $1.4 million, $1.5 million available. Most of that money was loaned out. And there were projects that we were interested in doing that we had proposals for from the local communities. So some ideas came up, and one was to potentially tap into the, ask the Solid Waste Board if they're interested in utilizing some of the dollars that they have sitting in reserve, and kind of get it out into the community, get it out there working instead of just sitting in a low interest, account. Let's get it out there working, create some jobs, get some tax base, get it out there working. They agreed, and they thought it was a good idea. So there was a period of time, 3-4 years, 5 years, that we worked with them to help finance some projects when the IDB itself didn't have enough funds. So there was a partnership between them and the IDB, and we worked out some loans with them to help finance some projects. So. But it came to the point where the Solid Waste Board did need to recapture those dollars for closing the landfill and so forth.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go on record thanking Mr. Coughlin and anybody else that was involved in this. Out of all the things that this county board has done, we've done a lot of stuff, but I don't know of anything that creates what we've done to help our citizens and our businesses is what we've done here, So therefore, I just want to personally thank Mr. Coughlin and anybody else who was involved in this, because I wish we could do more things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Singstad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jerry, on that page, the listing on the page, second to the last page, it shows that 2 loans have been extended. Mm-hmm. One to the city of Amro, one to the village of Winnebago. What do you mean by extended? Does that mean the principal was rolled over?
Yeah, that's essentially correct. They it's not a standard operating procedure for the board. Roll this loan, and extend it out, to help finance these additional expansions that we have, pending here. And that's essentially what's happened here in the most recent past here. One in Winnebago and one in Amarillo. And certainly the board reviews that and determines whether it makes sense or not, and in this case it did.
Thank you.
And it's always to produce extra jobs.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. It was very informative. At this time, I'd like the Health Director, Doug Guerin, to come up, and he's going to be explaining the e-cigarette situation.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Supervisors, for your time tonight. I'd like to give you just a brief informational on e-cigarettes, and just to make sure everybody has a baseline for what the Board of Health has been considering in terms of potentially some resolutions into the future. But it's important that
you have to talk more directly in the mic.
Sure, but it's important that that you all have a base understanding of what e-cigarettes are, how they're used, what their components are, before we move forward. So, thank you for the Board of Health for your consideration and recommendations for doing this educational session tonight. Up on the board here are some examples of e-cigarettes and e-cigarette products. You also have a handout tonight that should be at your desks. The front of that handout, the first couple pages, is a couple of slides with notes for you for after the presentation to refer to. The content after that includes a one-pager from the American Academy of Pediatrics about e-cigarettes. It's a real quick one-page overview, front and back. The following document is a policy guide for you to take a look at related to electronic smoking devices. That's multiple pages and goes into some depth about what's been happening at the national level. And then finally, two articles in the back. One a local article from San Francisco, dated January 4th, regarding issues related to e-cigarettes going on there. And then an editorial from the USA Today is that final page from them that provides some additional information for you as well. So to kick off, I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood what an e-cigarette was. The diagrams on your handout show that that e-cigarettes are typically battery operated devices that typically deliver nicotine or another substance, intended for consumption, simulating smoking, through inhalation. And essentially, how they work is the battery is used to heat the solution that's in the electronic cigarette and allow you to inhale that liquid in a vaporized form. The typical components of what we call e-cigarette juice or the product that's in the e-cigarette. And that might be a product that's sealed in the e-cigarette already, or it might be put into a chamber of an e-cigarette, depending on what type of e-cigarette you have. But primarily the intent is to deliver nicotine without using combustion for smoking, so to not use cigarettes or as an alternative to deliver nicotine. That nicotine is largely derived from tobacco, so pretty much all the nicotine that's in the e-cigarette juice is from tobacco. It is possible to synthetically produce nicotine, but it's far cheaper to harvest nicotine right from tobacco itself. The e-cigarettes, those common components include, a vegetable glycerin, a propylene glycol. Those are, the bulk of the volume, and then also, obviously nicotine in varying amounts, and that's put in based on, what the intended use is for, and so that can be in varying concentrations. And then there's going to be flavorants that are in there that are of various composition and have multiple components that vary from product to product. The juice that's in these e-cigarettes comes in a variety of flavors. So it's not many of these are intended to taste and simulate a regular cigarette, but there's also many flavors, hundreds of flavors, in fact, that are available for purchase. By and large, these flavorings are produced within the United States. They're not regulated in any way. You're relying on whoever produced that product to tell you what's actually in that product, on that label. The e-cigarettes that you have on here on that front page, there's an example of each on the board here. I do want to invite you, after the presentation, to come on up and actually take a closer look at the devices, to take a look at the containers of e-juice that we have, so that you get a better understanding of what they look like and how they're sold and what the e-juice packaging is like. There's currently no real scientific evidence that really establishes the safety of e-cigarettes at this time. There's been a lot of studies that have been done, but there's really no conclusive evidence at this point in time as to what the safety of these products are. The products themselves are fairly new. Many of you probably have not even seen one yet. Certainly many of you have not handled one or seen one actually smoked. If you have, you know that they can produce quite a vapor cloud upon use. The vapor is largely water from in your lungs. The propylene glycol attracts water, and when you exhale, you get quite a cloud, and that's mostly from the vapor from your lungs. It also includes, of course, the components of the e-juice itself, which include the propylene glycol, the vegetable glycerins, the nicotine, and any other additives that have been added to that e-cigarette juice. The product itself, has been around for about 10 years, but we've only seen, a surgence in popularity and use over the last several. It really started as kind of a mom and pop business. Most of the e-cigarette devices themselves are made overseas, but there's been a significant interest in recent years by big tobacco. So the large tobacco companies are purchasing smaller e-cigarette manufacturers. They have products of their own now, and they are heavily investing in e-cigarettes as we're seeing large declines in smoking of traditional cigarette products. Just a few examples of the popularity. In 2010, so just less than 5 years ago, 9.8% of the population had ever used an e-cigarette. By 2013, that increased to 36.5%. And there's an attraction, and so I guess I want to kind of cover with you, why e-cigarettes? Why are people using these? Why do we use them? They certainly perceive from advertising and from the information that's been provided that e-cigarettes are less dangerous than cigarettes. And I think from a public health perspective, long term we're going to see that pans out, that e-cigarettes are less hazardous than traditional cigarettes. People are also using them because they want to try to quit, cut back on smoking or quit, and some people have been successful. Many people have been successful in quitting using e-cigarettes, but they're mostly they're not used for that, and they were not designed for that. They may at some point, it may pan out that there's a use for e-cigarettes in quitting smoking. But right now, it's really up to the individual to try that on their own if that's what their primary interest is, but that's not the intent of the device. They've never been billed or meant to be cessation devices. There are other established cessation methods. The FDA has approved, I believe, 7 other methods for quitting smoking, but e-cigarettes are currently not one of them. They may cost less than cigarettes as well. The initial investment can be high, depending on what type of an e-cigarette you purchase. So that's an attraction as well. They can be used right now in areas that traditional cigarettes can't, and that's a really big attraction. So for a current smoker that does not want to quit, but can't use a cigarette in a workplace or in some other place that smoking is prohibited, an e-cigarette offers an alternative. Because they are not currently banned in most places for use indoors like cigarettes are. It's a new product too. I mean, they're very interesting devices. These new electronic devices, they're popular with kids, and there's been quite a bit of advertising that's been increasing the attractiveness of the product. The products are not regulated by the FDA at this time. There is no ban on or regulations in place on who these products can be marketed to. So, they can be marketed in places that traditional cigarettes can't, and in all of the places that, and we're seeing that in all of the places that traditional cigarettes used to be marketed prior to FDA regulation and banning of that advertising. We're coming to a point over the last several years where we've seen quite a decline in smoking rates by adults and youth, and so we're seeing this increase in popularity of e-cigarettes, which I think we have some concerns that we're trading one product for another. E-cigarettes typically are used to deliver nicotine. Nicotine is addictive. In traditional cigarettes, nicotine is what drives the smoker to continue to smoke, where it's most of the other components of the cigarette that are really more hazardous to health. And in the case with e-cigarettes, nicotine will certainly drive continued use of that product or other nicotine-containing products. And we do have concerns about the long-term health effects. Certainly, the products that I mentioned, like propylene glycol that are in e-cigarettes, are being used elsewhere. They've been approved for consumption by the FDA, but they haven't been studied or approved for use in inhalation situations. If you're using propylene glycol as a component of a medicine such as an inhaler, you're receiving small doses of that. You receive doses of propylene glycol in food and other products, but typically you're not inhaling deeply into your lungs, dozens of times or hundreds of times per day for an extended period of time. And that's what we don't know right now in terms of some of the health effects. When you have that repeated long-term chronic exposure to these products, how is that going to affect your health in the long term? It took us a very long time to establish that tobacco, was bad for your health. Went back to 1968 when that Surgeon General's report came out, that declared, tobacco dangerous for your health, that it causes cancer. It took decades for that information to come out. And I think we want to be cautious that we don't, that we realize there may be hazards associated with this product that we just don't know yet. The rates of use, as I mentioned, are rapidly increasing. According to the 2013 National Youth Tobacco Survey, the smoking of e-cigarettes by high school students tripled between 2011 and 2015. Most of those are dual users. In other words, they smoke cigarettes and e-cigarettes. But the popularity is surging, and there are certainly a minority, but a significant number of youth that are using e-cigarettes that have never used cigarettes before. So in other words, they're using these products that contain nicotine, often contain nicotine, and they're becoming addicted through a whole new method than traditional smoking. And so that's a concern that we have. The 2014, so that data was 2013 from the CDC. According to the 2014 Wisconsin Youth Tobacco Survey, the high school e-cigarette use rate is 7.9%. That's a double what the national rate is based on that same time period. So in Wisconsin, we're using e-cigarettes. Youth are using e-cigarettes at higher rates than the rest of the nation. The use of e-cigarettes, I'd like to address a bit about who's actually using that. About 75% of e-cigarette users report that they're also smokers, and that's where I talk about dual use. So most users of e-cigarettes are using them along with regular tobacco products. They're not using them to quit. About 12% of e-cigarette users report that they were former smokers and now just use e-cigarettes exclusively. The current population of individuals that is former smokers is larger than the current population using tobacco or using cigarettes. There certainly is great potential for former smokers to become attracted to this product based on the way it's advertised, to feel that it's a healthier product or a healthier alternative. They may still have those nicotine cravings, they may still want to engage in smoking, and they may feel that this is a safer way to do it. And while it may be safer than traditional cigarettes, I wouldn't consider it or recommend it as a safe practice, at this time. So, primary concerns that we have, e-cigarettes are creating a renormalization and even a reglamorization of smoking. We're seeing e-cigarette use in the media, in movies, in references at media events, paid promotions, and it's giving the communities, it's giving youth the perception that that using e-cigarettes is just okay. And I think we need to be very careful about what message we're sending. We've worked very hard in Wisconsin. Many states have also worked hard to get to the point of clean air. We certainly overwhelmingly enjoy that there is no smoking in restaurants, in taverns, in public places where smoking used to occur on a regular basis. And e-cigarettes make it difficult to tell the difference. If you haven't seen an e-cigarette before and somebody's using one, you might question whether they're actually smoking a regular cigarette or not. Certainly the devices the initial generation of devices of e-cigarettes are made to look very much like cigarettes. More recent generations don't look quite so much like that and have features like an LED glowing tip, or have a larger reservoir capacity, or are made of all metal, and they don't look so much like cigarettes anymore. But if you don't see the device and you just see the cloud of vapor that goes up, you may not know whether it's a cigarette, smoke coming out, or it's just vapor from an e-cigarette. So that's making it confusing in terms of enforcement of the current smoke-free air law. It's when people don't know what's actually, if there's actually a tobacco product being smoked. And there is, secondhand vapor that's occurring. And as I mentioned before, there's, products in that vapor, including, moisture from the lungs, but the vegetable glycerins, the propylene glycol, the nicotine, and other products that are in there. Not everything that's in that e-cigarette juice is absorbed. It is exhaled into the environment. If you've been near an e-cigarette, you may know, because you detected an odor that was different. They don't necessarily smell like tobacco products. They often have some sort of a perfumey-like flavor. So in addition to the potential hazards for smoke-free air and that confusion, and others that may be exposed to those vapors, certainly individuals that have existing lung conditions, asthma, other lung conditions that may be sensitive to components of an e-cigarette, vapor exhaust or vapor exhale, are certainly not expecting to have to run into that now that we have smoke-free air, smoke-free workplaces, smoke-free restaurants. We are again exposing individuals that are expecting a smoke-free environment to these new products that are currently legal unless they're banned by an establishment directly. The products that are put into e-cigarettes are not regulated. There's no regulation on the manufacturer of e-cigarettes. There's no regulation on the e-juice that's put in them. You'll see when you look at the products up here, many of them have handwritten information on them. They're not commercially produced in many instances. Some are. Many of them have caps that come off fairly easily. They're not child resistant. That's not required, although more manufacturers are incorporating that safety feature voluntarily. And you're really relying on whoever put that together to tell you what's really in that product or how much nicotine is in that product. There have been many examples where tests random tests of e-cigarette juice have shown that what's on the label isn't what's in the product. And so it's still a buyer beware. You're not guaranteed that what's on that label or the content of nicotine that's in that product is actually what's there. So we're not alone in having concerns about this issue. The FDA is working and has put out draft regulations that address things about the manufacturer, the content, advertising that'll occur at a national level at some point in the future. That draft regulation is currently in place for comment, but it's likely that once that draft regulation has been reviewed and finalized, and if it's approved, it's still going to take a couple of years for that to take effect. Currently in Wisconsin, we already have smoke-free air policies, we have policies that include e-cigarettes in their smoke-free air policies. Currently, the city of Greenfield in Milwaukee County, Ashwaubenon in Brown County, and Onalaska, which is near Eau Claire on the western side of the state. The city of Madison is voting on e-cigarettes being included in the smoke-free air law tonight. They're having a meeting like this tonight, and they're voting on a resolution to ban e-cigarettes or to include them, much like we have a ban on cigarettes now. A number of states have already passed statewide bans for e-cigarettes. They include North Dakota, New Jersey, and Utah. The city of Neenah has already passed a ban on e-cigarette use in city buildings. That'll begin in August. And there's been other communities like Fond du Lac. They've also voted to not allow e-cigarette use in buildings. And then there's other communities that have entertained legislation and brought it for a vote. and that has not been successful. So right now there is great interest in providing some regulation for this product. Certainly trying to, establish now that we have an increase in popularity of this product, rapid growth, and troubling in that we have rapid increases in youth use. There's more and more pressure at the national level for some regulation. Locally, we can certainly make decisions about including e-cigarettes in a ban for county for county buildings and vehicles, and certainly we can also entertain a resolution to treat an e-cigarette like a cigarette for the purposes of smoke-free air. In the last two parts of your packet include some draft resolutions, and those are, as I just mentioned, one for county buildings and vehicles, and the second for including e-cigarette essentially as a cigarette product and banning their use indoors wherever a cigarette is currently banned. I guess the main points that I really want you to leave with tonight, and the things that I want you to consider moving forward, is that there's misinformation out there. E-cigarettes give off more than water vapor. You're going to hear that they give off just water vapor. That is not the case. E-cigarettes can undermine the clean indoor air law because they make enforcement confusing. It's hard to tell when somebody's smoking an e-cigarette versus a cigarette unless you actually see the device. There's no regulations on the manufacture or sale of e-cigarettes to protect consumers. Now, in Wisconsin, it is illegal to sell a nicotine product to minors. But it's the only way to tell if there's nicotine, in a refillable e-cigarette is to actually test the liquid. And so it's really not practical to know if an e-cigarette contains nicotine or not. But it is currently law that minors cannot purchase nor possess nicotine-containing products. That has not had much effect on the rapidly increasing use of e-cigarettes by youth, much like we know that youth have fairly easy access to alcohol. The e-cigarettes are not approved by the FDA to help smokers quit. As I mentioned, that there are 7 other FDA-approved methods. There are many examples and stories of people that have used e-cigarettes to quit, but by and large, that is not why they're used, and that's not why they're marketed. E-cigarette sales are escalating. They will continue to escalate. The industry's intent isn't to have people quit smoking and not use their products anymore. E-cigarette users most often continue to use regular cigarettes. And e-cigarettes definitely appeal to youth. With flavors like gummy bear and cotton candy and grape, amongst many other flavors that are certainly targeted more towards adults. Youth definitely have an appeal, and we can see that many youth are starting to use these products. So if there's any questions,
Supervisor
happy to answer them.
Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, first, thank you. It's a good thing you just put on, but I have a couple of questions that maybe I misunderstood you. Because you said that the e-cigarettes, the juices or whatever, are non-regulated, all right? Then a little bit later, you said that the e-cigarettes are less hazardous. Now, how can we tell if no regulation on it? Because how do we know what's in it? I mean, I can go back into the 60s, and smoking was just a common thing. Then we've lost a lot of people, a lot of friends, neighbors, relations, due to that kind of smoking. And I just can't see where our government today would allow something of this nature if we don't know what's really in it. Now, maybe I'm getting far off, I don't know. But I just don't want to see us
go one more step, and we have a lot of potential danger.
Yeah, I can give you a little bit of history. Back in 2009, the FDA attempted to regulate e-cigarettes as medical devices, essentially as a drug delivery device. In addition to, you can put liquids in e-cigarettes. Most often they contain nicotine. You can certainly have juices that don't contain nicotine in them as well. Or you can have substances that contain other illicit substances, such as marijuana in them as well. The industry fought to have e-cigarettes classified as tobacco products, and they won. And so they've been classified as tobacco products and therefore have been able to be sold like tobacco products, but since they're not actually conventional tobacco products, they've not been subject to the regulations that cigarettes have been. That's where the FDA is working right now, trying to put together, a reasonable set of rules and guidance on how these products should be handled. This is certainly, unlike, the process that's in place for, approving a new drug. If you have a new prescription drug, it takes years of research and time to bring that product to market so that you can actually prescribe it to someone. This process is really just the opposite. It's legal until proven, that it shouldn't be.
Thank you.
Supervisor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, since the FDA can regulate how much fat we have in our butter, how come they can't regulate how much nicotine can be put in these liquids that people are using in these e-cigarettes?
They can. Well, I shouldn't say that. They can't at this time. They're working on regulations related to e-cigarettes and what can be put in them, what the juice can be composed of, the e-cigarette devices themselves, and that's all in a draft form right now and has been receiving comment. But it's still likely years off before any of those regulations, are approved and go into effect.
Okay. Are any of those liquids that they do not contain any nicotine?
Yeah. So the substances, typically the bottles are labeled with how much nicotine is in them, and so you can get them in varying amounts. And yes, you can get juices that are labeled to have no nicotine, and you're trusting that there's no nicotine in them.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned business establishments can currently ban e-cigarette use on their own now. Yeah. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, just like they could with tobacco products in the past, with cigarettes in the past.
So if Olive Garden wants to ban e-cigarettes, they can ban e-cigarettes. But if a tavern wants to allow that right now, that's fine.
That's correct.
Okay. Another question, is chewing tobacco covered under the current smoke-free tobacco use laws?
No, unless an establishment, and Anna, you might need to help me out with this, unless an establishment restricts no tobacco. Chew can certainly be used, and other, dissolvable tobacco products, orbs and other things, can be used in establishments. It's really a ban on smoking primarily.
Okay, so we don't have a county-wide ban on chewing tobacco in public places or businesses?
No, Anna, right there. Yep. Okay. And I should have, and I meant to introduce Anna earlier. Anna Carpenter is a health educator and our tobacco prevention specialist at the health department, and has been instrumental in putting together some of the information for tonight.
Okay, and I have one more question. You mentioned that there was no conclusive evidence of their safety. Is there any conclusive evidence of their danger at this point?
There are many studies, that show the potential for danger. Actually, one of the articles that I was reviewing was actually it's in preventative medicine. It's actually a systematic review of health effects of electronic cigarettes, and what they did was they tried to pull together all of the studies that they could find about e-cigarettes and try to, look at those as a whole and try to come up with some conclusions. There were over 1,000 studies that were initially identified, but they had to whittle those down for ones that actually included information that was relevant, for this review and were comparable. There were nearly 100 that were. What they found was that about a third of those articles, the authors had conflicts of interest. So in other words, the research was being done by someone that, that was either selling product or producing product or had some sort of, other interest in that. And I'll keep this short here because, the conclusions, there were experimental studies that have found, effects, some short-term effects. We really don't have a lot of really long-term effects yet, but the conclusion of this article, which I'm happy to share, was that due to many methodological problems, severe conflicts of interest, the relatively few and often small studies, the inconsistencies and contradictions in results, and the lack of long-term follow-up, no firm conclusions can be drawn on the safety of electronic cigarettes. However, they can hardly be considered harmless.
So there's no conclusive evidence that they're hazardous or even cancer-causing at this point.
That's correct. Yes. So I think by and large, the literature does not consider them harmless, but we haven't been able to say definitively that they cause this medical condition after a prolonged period of use.
Okay, just one observation, because you had mentioned their marketing, and as a smoker, I had looked into a business, one of the many businesses that seem to be popping up that sell these. This one was up on North Jackson Street, and it was interesting because they had they promoted that they had the tapering down degrees of nicotine, and this is for quitting smoking. And then they had so they emphasized that you start at one level and then you keep reducing the level of nicotine to help you wean yourself from both the smoking and the addiction. And then they had a big wall in the back where there were probably 100 notes. People would take a marker and write, that once they'd quit smoking, that they would write their name on there and how many days that they had gone without a cigarette. And it was sort of a real celebration of their ability to quit. So I understand there's these concerns about the marketing to youth, but I think as the number of smokers in this country declines, which is a good thing, and I would love to join that number, there is a marketing to people to quit smoking from some of these. So it's just an personal observation that I wanted to share. Thank you for the presentation.
Supervisor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might go back to the FDA discussion, you said it's currently under review. It's open for comments. Then I assume at some point during this year, and I did go on the website and do a little research on this, they will render a decision.
I'm not familiar with the timeline on the process right now, but
it indicated it will be this year.
Okay.
Now, I also conclude that it might be a couple of years before that could be implemented. But this board, the residents of the state and this county will know when they render that decision what it will be, whether it's harmful or not. Would that be correct?
I think the regulations that are under review now, it's not a research study to determine whether they're harmful or not, or to what degree. It's to regulate the manufacture and advertising and the content and labeling of that product, so that we're assured of consistency in that product, from the manufacturer of the devices themselves to what's actually in the e-juice or liquids that go into those.
What I read, if they reclassify them, then they could regulate them. So it depends on how they determine the classification of the product. And that's what's under review, correct?
Well, the entire rule is under review and for comment, but I mean, it seems very likely that there will be regulation of e-cigarettes from the FDA in the future.
But the decision to do that would be done this year.
It may, from the information that you've shared.
Supervisor Rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question, Doug. Who's the driving force behind these potential resolutions? Is it an individual in the county? A group of individuals? The committee?
Yeah.
Or you as the health director?
Yeah. So really the driving force here is, is our interest in, protecting residents of the community, for, establishing and reducing the trouble for indoor air. And so it's really been a collective work by staff of the health department. We've shared information about e-cigarettes with the Board of Health over a couple of meetings, and asked for their guidance on this issue. And the Board of Health, with the information that we've presented, has made recommendations to bring forth some draft information to them and to conduct this informational session here tonight, which would likely be followed by recommendations or draft resolutions for consideration at a future date.
I certainly think you've come up with a topic that in future meetings will fill the gallery in the back. Thank you.
Supervisor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, another question on that. They have the, in 2013, there were over 1,400 child deaths from ingesting the liquid for these e-cigarettes. Are those things required, the containers, to be child-proof capped?
So I just want to reflect on the first part. There haven't been over 1,400 child deaths, I don't believe. I believe that there's been, there may have been exposures or poisonings or reports from poison control centers related to, accidental exposures to children, but there have not been that many deaths. And secondarily, no, there's no regulation on packaging. Any child-proof caps that are, on products is at the discretion of the manufacturer. And you'll see the ones that we have don't have child-proof caps on them.
Okay, because the reason why I'm asking is I think that would be an OSHA area rather than FDA.
The FDA really is going to provide oversight of the product itself. OSHA is really more of a worker safety and health issue. That certainly, that has come up. I mean, in other industry, I think one of the more recent ones I heard about related to this was, the manufacturer of microwave popcorn, and the content of that gives that buttery flavoring to microwave popcorn. Many workers, get exposed to that chronically. It's not hazardous in the product. We don't consider it to be hazardous to consume, but workers inhaling that product over a long period of time, develop lung disease.
I think if
Supervisor
OSHA got
Skellinger.
involved, it would be a lot quicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One observation that I guess I wanted to share was that a lot of healthcare providers that I've seen recently have restricted the use of e-cigarettes in their facilities, and I believe the Oshkosh public transit system also includes it. Just wanted to kind of add that, I guess, maybe to the background on what authorities are prohibiting it. I guess something that kind of strikes me from the presentation is that we seem to be asking to regulate e-cigarettes more than smokeless tobacco products. Is that fair to say?
From the aspect of clean air, yes.
Okay, and when we look at the sample drafts of, they refer to changing the County Code Chapter 9, Articles 14 and 31, do you know what the reason why those chapters were accepted? Was it because of the nicotine content? Was it because they were marketing to children? We've kind of heard a lot of different reasons why we should regulate e-cigarettes, and I'm kind of trying to piece together if it fits into the reason that we originally adopted that part of the code.
And if you could just refresh me on what individually is in those two sections specifically.
914 is smoking in county buildings. And so in the sample one, it just adds including electronic delivery devices and The 931, I don't actually have
Sure.
the text is.
The smoking in county buildings was enacted prior to the smoke-free workplace ban. It also, I believe, helped provide some definition of what is considered a reasonable distance. The statewide law doesn't restrict how far away from, an entrance smoking is allowed. It just defines it as a reasonable distance, and I think for the purposes of establishing an actual distance, that's in our local code.
Okay. And my last question is regards to the placement of the juices. I guess is that something that is restricted in where it can be in the retail outlet? Can it, is it required to be behind the counter, or is that something that we'd be looking at?
Yeah, there's no restrictions at this time. I'm sure that most retailers would have it behind the counter, though, and you would have to ask to handle it. They're small containers. I haven't been to all the e-cig shops, so I don't know exactly how they're displayed, but there is no regulation on that.
Is it a product that the tobacco industry reimburses for theft?
We would have to ask one of the retailers about that. I have no idea.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions as I listened to the presentation. I'm assuming that the sales of this product is not restricted. Minors can buy it?
Minors...
If minors walk into one of those e-cigarette shops, they could actually get one?
That would be up to the shop, and legally, they could purchase a product if it didn't contain nicotine. They're also certainly available online. The devices are widely available online.
Has there been any studies on secondhand vapor?
There have been many studies, and this review that I mentioned here, there's many conflicting pieces of evidence. There really is no, there are no definitive conclusions at this point. We expect that, yes, that they, provide some degree of harm. However, we don't know to what extent.
So, comment on that, but I just want to ask another question here. How addictive can they be?
Well, they're as addictive as traditional cigarettes. Nicotine is the addictive portion, of cigarettes. It's also the addictive portion of an e-cigarette juice.
But they don't have any carcinogens like the cigarettes do?
There are many less compounds. It's a much simpler solution than the very complex number of mixtures that are compounds that are in a traditional cigarette. There's some question right now as to, with some of the newer products that have larger batteries and operate at higher temperatures, as to what effect those high temperatures have on the liquid and whether or not they create, additional compounds that may be less safe in that process. So, the industry is evolving, and the products are too.
Are you looking to ban the complete use of the e-cigarette or just use in particular public places?
Our initial recommendation really just focuses on, use in county buildings and vehicles, and then to treat e-cigarettes like cigarettes in terms of smoke-free air. We have no intent at this time to, look at restricting, the sale or, other control in other ways that, we're certainly, that'll be left up to the state and to the feds to determine.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, we've talked a lot about the health risks of this. As a non-smoker, one of the disgusting things about cigarettes, and I speak for a lot of people, is the smell of it, just the flat-out odor. Does the vapor from this also reflect these flavors that you talked about? That you'd smell that if somebody was next to you?
I've smelled e-cigarette vapor. I can't say I'm very experienced, so I haven't, I can't tell you that, I can distinguish one flavor from another when I smell it. But you certainly do know, especially if there's agents that, are flavorings that create a perfumey type smell or other smell as a result of that product. You typically know if it's a flavored product if somebody's smoking it near you.
So if someone was sitting next to me in a restaurant, could be blowing gummy bear flavor at me. That doesn't sound like a very pleasing dining experience. Thank you.
Supervisor Knitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Say, Doug, I would think by now, as I skim through your handout here, that there's enough data to at least put on the product that this may be injurious to your health. Something along that line. Don't you agree?
That's really not for me to decide. I think that we know that, in general, the products are likely to, be detrimental to health to some extent. We don't know how much, and we don't know if it's worthy of, of labeling the product as such. That's really for the researchers and the FDA to decide. And I don't know if Anna, if you had any, I know that there's some voluntary labeling that may be occurring in this community and elsewhere on the e-juice packages that do indicate that there's risk in consuming that product. But that would be voluntary. It's not required.
Well, I would think when I read here already, that the FDA has enough data to put that on there, on the product.
They're like I said, they're going through that process now, but it's likely, at least years off before any of those regulations would go into effect.
Thank you.
Supervisor Warnke.
Doug, I think you really need to make your mission clearer as to what you're trying to do. You're not taking on the whole problem of the e-cigarettes. What you're asking for, from what I read, is you're asking that the same rules for cigarettes or tobacco, as far as that goes, apply to e-cigarettes. Is this correct?
Tonight, I'm not asking anything. Tonight was really...
I know,
yeah.
but you're talking about bringing a resolution in,
Mm-hmm.
and the resolution would be just for the same rules as cigarettes or cigars or any kind of smoke, as far as people sitting in restaurants and at bars, or as far as that goes anywhere.
That's correct.
And, you're not going to solve this problem of e-cigarettes in a county, but you can certainly get the rules that apply to smoking in it. And, nobody's saying to people, I've gotten some emails that people are just up in arms already about this, and it's like you're trying to take their gun away. You're not doing that. What you're trying to do is to bring the same rules in that apply to smoking. And I really think that the rest of the problem is up to the state and the federal government. So that's about what I think you're trying to do. And if you agree with me, I would think that you would push this point a little bit.
Yeah, I think, my intent tonight was to give you, a broad base of knowledge of e-cigarettes, and certainly, I think having knowledge about the products, how they're used, why they're used the way they're used, concerns that we have from a public health standpoint about youth use, the addictive nature of the product, all plays into your base of knowledge to make you knowledgeable enough to entertain a resolution in the future. And really that was the intent tonight. I just wanted to make sure that all of you had a base level of knowledge about e-cigarettes and understood, what our concerns were and why we have provided you with that draft resolution language, and that the Board of Health will consider further, and you'll likely see additional information and an ask in terms of a resolution to determine whether, this body would like to do any rulemaking related to that.
Now, you talked about there were other counties who passed resolutions did they pass the resolution to make the same rules that apply to smoking as to e-cigarettes? Is this what you're saying?
Yes. There's varying, some have restricted just to county buildings and vehicles. Others have done that and, made that a part of the smoke-free, air law for that jurisdiction.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I came across something about 2-3 weeks ago that really did kind of surprise me, and I don't know a whole lot about this, and never being a smoker. I just happened to be at the Appleton Public Library, and I came out of the door, and on the steps right out in front, before you walk down the steps, were 3 little girls who looked to be, I don't think they could have been 10 years old. And what caught my eye was this huge amount of smoke or puffing, whatever it was, that at the time, I really don't know a whole lot about these cigarettes. And I looked at them and I thought, what in the world are these kids puffing on? Because here's these big smoke coming up. And so somebody must have seen that I had kind of a surprised look on my face, a lady, and she said, you know, we've tried to get them away from here, but we've been told for them buying this is no different than if they wanted to go out and buy bubble gum. There's no real difference to it. If they can buy bubble gum and blow bubbles on the steps of the library, or they can puff this smoke up in the air. So somehow or another, I would think there'd be some kind of fight going on to get some kind of rules and regulations. If nothing else, it certainly doesn't give a good example to littler kids that were coming out with their mothers, that these kids can sit here, and I'm sure they were no more than 10 years old. They were much shorter than I am, and that says a whole lot, so I don't really know much about it. I probably have grandchildren or great-grandchildren that are puffing on these and don't know about it, so.
Supervisor Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thought I'd add on briefly to the comments that Director Gearing made in regards to Supervisor Rowe's question, which I thought was a legitimate one. And I just thought I would add on to that a little bit. Back in the fall of this year, the Health Department staff notified the Board of Health that they'd collected some information in regards to e-cigarettes and whether or not the Board of Health would be interested in hearing about some of that information. And so at our meeting a month ago, in the beginning of December, they provided us this very similar information that you're receiving tonight, as well as those draft resolutions. And we, as a Board of Health, thought it would be best not for us to do anything with that information, but rather take the opportunity for you all to get educated about that information as well as to get educated about what we were at least considering before we move forward with any sort of action going forward. And I still feel that's the best approach to take. We certainly knew that it would engender a lot of conversation and public interest, and that's a good thing. I remember back about 10 years ago being involved in Appleton with the indoor smoke-free workplace ordinance. And I was asked about that and what my intent was initially. And I said my intent was very simple at that time, and that was simply to start the conversation. And I think it's fair to say that the goal here tonight was to start that conversation and provide some of that education. I certainly think achieve that goal. So just wanted to flesh out a little of the background behind that very reasonable question to ask. Thank you.
Okay. Supervisor Rowe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Supervisor Ramos, for explaining the background a little bit. I appreciate it. Just one point of clarification, going back to what Supervisor Warnke said just a couple minutes ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor Warnke, but you said something that Doug had mentioned several counties that had passed ordinances, and he said yes, but correct me if I'm wrong, when you gave your presentation, you mentioned, I didn't write them down, but you mentioned Onalaska and 2 other cities. I didn't hear any counties.
And that is correct.
Thank you.
I do, yeah. If it pleases you, I can give you a little more background. There are city policies in place, as I mentioned, in Onalaska, Ashwaubenon, Greenfield. There are also city policies in place that only cover city buildings and properties in Eau Claire, Appleton, and Neenah. There are county policies in place, I believe, in Eau Claire, Fond du Lac, Manitowoc, and Marquette, but I believe those may only cover county buildings and vehicles. I don't have the detail on that. There are many policies in place in the school system around the state, and there are many communities like ours that are having this discussion perhaps not at this level, at the county board level at this point, but certainly looking at the issue.
Well, thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
I have an announcement that I wanted to say that probably isn't going to last long. The federal mileage reimbursement rate is 57.5 starting in January. I'm sure there's going to be one coming out that it'll be 52 cents in February because of the low price of fuel right now. But for January, you're put down 57.5 cents for the mileage. Thank you. We're adjourned. Supervisor Rubel.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move that we adjourn until Tuesday, January 20th at 6 p.m. for our regular business meeting.
Been moved and seconded. We are adjourned.